All right, welcome everybody to AP Psychology. This is going to be the first of many videos where I'm going to kind of walk you through a lot of the different topics and pieces here. This one's going to be really short, just to kind of introduce us to one of our methods, and then we're going to do kind of an activity next time I see you guys. But this is the very beginning of our first section, which we usually refer to as methods. Right now I believe it's called the scientific methods of psychology. So the first thing I want to talk about really quickly is just the scientific method in general. And this is something you probably know about or talked about in any other science class, but just kind of review, right? So what this is really referring to is how scientists and researchers answer questions. And there's kind of 5 main steps. You could break it down even more in depth if you wanted to, but 5 big ones, right? The first one is forming a question. So what do we want to know, right? What are we looking for? What do we care about? Why do people do this? Why do some people like this way but not this way? Right, that would be our forming a question. Number 2, right, is forming a hypothesis. So what is our guess? What do we think is going to happen, right? So if I want to know why do some people score better on standardized tests than others, right, my hypothesis might be, maybe they had a more practice doing that, right? That's my hypothesis. I think it's going to have to do with practice. Number 3 was to test our hypothesis. So then we need to figure out, how are we going to look at that, right? What are we going to do to see if our answer is correct, right? And we're going to talk about all the different ways we can test our hypothesis in this methods, and that's really what methods is mostly about. Number 4 is then analyzing those results. So once we've actually done our experiment or our observation or our survey or our case study, or whatever our method is, right, we have to look over that data and determine what does that really tell us, right? Number 5, which is basically our final step, is to draw a conclusion. So I look back at my data and I say, yes, I was correct, I wasn't correct, maybe there's something else that I didn't even think about. Maybe, and this happens a lot more than you think, it comes back and our conclusion is that we still don't know because it didn't work or the answers are kind of all over the place. I added a last piece here and I just kind of covered it a little bit. 5A which is replicate, right? Which is probably the most important part, which is where we need somebody else then to go in and do our study again, right? Follow those steps exactly the same and see if they get the correct answers, right? To make sure that it happens over and over again. One piece I want to mention before we move on from this slide is just, I know you guys probably know the scientific method or have at least heard it pretty well. We will kind of be later on in like 3 days, I believe, or 3 class periods, I should say, you guys will be designing and creating an experiment, right? So you're going to be following these steps. You're not going to actually carry it out necessarily, but you'll be kind of going through some of these pieces. All right, so the first actual method that I want to talk about is probably our simplest one, right? Which is a survey, right? Surveys, I'm sure you've all done before, you've all seen before, you've probably even made them before, right? As I talk about methods, I do these a little bit differently than a lot of our other terms. Our top part here, and you can see it right here, right, is just basically the definition. And then for methods, I specifically always break down advantages and disadvantages because that's usually what they're looking for you to know on the actual test, right? Later on when we talk about biology and stuff, it'll be more of just the definition and less of kind of this other pieces that are involved. So a survey is a way to collect information, right, by asking people questions directly, right? And then we are taking down those answers. Now, technically you could differentiate between like a survey and an interview, right? One is more kind of closed where you're, answering kind of like this picture down here, A, B, C, or D. An interview may be more open, right? But they're both basically doing the same thing. The advantages of a survey and the reason people use surveys is they're very easy to create and you can gather a ton of information all at once, right? You guys could go and create a survey right now using a Google form. You could put it on a bunch of different social media and you could get thousands of people to fill it out, within a day or 2. So it collects a lot of information really quickly. The disadvantages or possible problems are, right, is one, that you're relying on the honesty of those people answering questions, right? So if they're, lying or maybe they just don't know or they overestimate or underestimate, that's going to mess up your results a little bit. Additionally, right, the sample of the survey has to be representative, and it's really hard to do that. It's not always possible, right? And we're going to talk about what that means, like what is a representative sample. This is really quick. I'm not going to really talk much about it. This is just the chart we're going to use for our M&M sampling, or our Tasty Sampler. This is also in Canvas, so you can find it there. But you guys are just going to copy this down for yourselves later. Okay, so talking about sampling, and this is kind of what that activity is really all going to be about, right? So there's kind of three big terms that we want to talk about whenever we talk about it. The first thing is sampling bias, right? Now, what we want to do is, if you're going to do a survey, you don't want to only be able to apply it to the people who took the survey. You want to be able to take that information and then apply it generally, right? Apply it to all people or everybody in the US or whatever. So sampling bias can occur, right? Or when we are trying to take those samples and apply it, but it doesn't represent that bigger case, right? And this especially happens when we have a few vivid cases, right, that we remember. So a really good example of this is like shark attacks, right? Shark attacks hardly ever happen, right? Like, I think it's like less than 10 people every single year that get killed by a shark, right? But that's a really vivid thing, right? A lot of people think about being attacked by a shark when they go swimming in the ocean, right? That's sampling bias. That we have these really vivid, like, kind of pictures of something, or that things that we remember, but they don't represent, right, the majority of what's happening. Another thing we have to talk about with sampling is population. So population is the group that we are trying to describe, right? So if I want to know about everybody in Nevada, my population is the people that live in Nevada. If it's, I want to know about Desert Oasis High School, my population is the students at Desert Oasis High School, right? So it's the whole group that we're trying to study or describe. Now, our last piece is a random sample, right? So a random sample is basically just the idea that everybody in a population has a chance, right, of participating in it, right? So let's go with that Desert Oasis High School example, right? So I'm trying to do a survey at Desert Oasis. If I only go to AP classrooms, right, that's not going to be a random sample, right? Because AP kids might be a little bit different than somebody who's not in an AP class, right? So if I was going to do a random sample, I would want to make sure that everybody in the school had an equal chance of participating, okay? Really important thing here is that not everyone has to participate, right? So we're not going to do a survey where we get everybody involved. We're just trying to get it so there's an equal possibility of everybody involved, right? So that'll mix it up a little bit. All right, and that's where we're going to stop the video for today. We'll talk about observational methods in our next video.